It is Friday, April 16th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright everyone, welcome back. We have a fair amount to talk about from this past week, so let's start off as always with our PS Plus reminder. The April games are still available, so make sure you grab these before they go away. You still have some time left, but just make sure you do that. And let us start with PS5 firmware 21.01. So this is our first major PS5 system software update. We won't go over everything here because 2 days ago we actually did that. We showcased the 20-something changes, features, fixes, and secrets that Sony put in that firmware update, so you can get full coverage there in that video, alongside PS4 firmware update 8.50, so that also released the same day, and there's not nearly as many changes in there, but we got things like share play for PS5 content. On PlayStation 5, we got cold storage for those PS5 games on external drives, which is very handy. Trophy quality of life fixes, things like that. So overall, not too bad for our first update. Now, in terms of the mobile app, we did get some changes here as well, so this is also great to see that Sony's actually adding more features to that mobile app. Like recently, they introduced the ability to save games to your wish list, getting notifications for when friends go online, and then changing your online status right from the app. And they've also announced that coming up, they'll also add the ability to join a multiplayer session on PS5 from the app, also managing the console storage, which you can technically do, but only in the case of where your storage is full and you're trying to manually push a new download. So I'm guessing they'll just make it so you can manage the storage under any condition. Also comparing trophies with friends, sort and filtering options for the PlayStation Store. It's great to see that they are still expanding it, because for the longest time, the mobile apps that they offered were very poor for the majority of the PS4 lifecycle. So of course, the one big news story that we were able to cover in a separate video last week with LTPS was the Bloomberg article telling us a number of things, like that Last of Us remake out of the Small Visual Arts Service Group, which then got handed over to Naughty Dog, Sony Bend, and the slight turbulence there with senior management wanting to do their own thing, but some of their staff were being relegated to supporting Naughty Dog. Then at some point doing an Uncharted project, but it seems like that sizzled out fairly soon. Then they started doing their own thing, and the thing is, we covered it, but it was very much, the article was fresh, and it's been a week since then, so we've learned a few things, and certainly we've had time to reflect on it. And the thing that I called out like right away, at least in the video that I uploaded, was I'm sure people are going to see this as negative right away, and obviously that's what happened, because we are currently in a steamroll of constant negative press relating to anything Sony or PlayStation. But really, we can, well, let's cover up some of the things that we did learn first off, which is, well, during David Jaffe's live stream, the God of War creator, who's been doing a lot of live streams over on YouTube, he actually had Jeff Ross, the former Days Gone director, on there for long-form discussion, about 2.5, 3 hours long, something like that. But we actually learned about what that Days Gone 2 pitch actually looked like to Sony, which would have involved some sort of shared online co-op universe. The game could be played solo, of course, but that is part of the pitch and something that they actually wanted to do in the first game. So Jeff Ross was quoted saying, "We wanted co-op from the beginning in the first Days Gone, but obviously you have to make concessions for what you're not going to be able to do." That is something that is always worth remembering when it comes to game development. Projects will almost always be scaled back in some way, shape, or form, whether it's, a character, a level, a mode, or what have you, right? There has to be a cutoff, and that was it for Days Gone, apparently. And those ideas often carry into a sequel, or in this case, a pitch for what the potential sequel would have been. And the thing is, Days Gone certainly was a title that came out and was, a bit divisive. It seemed like initially, in terms of at least critical reception, it was more the performance of the game. But, over time, you had plenty of people try it and say, it just really wasn't for me. And the thing is, with titles like Days Gone or many others, you would hope that the sequels, given that's the developer's chance to really make some meaningful changes to what was a solid foundation. Now, we could argue all day, every day about if Sony should or should not have approved that pitch for Days Gone 2. I know a lot of people are upset about not getting that potential sequel, but there's also plenty of other folks that are saying, yeah, let's bring on that new IP, because that first game didn't sit with me all that well. There's give and take here. This was a fairly straightforward business decision that was made public, including an article that was about the business happenings at Sony Interactive Entertainment. I mean, the thing is, while we did learn about this Days Gone 2 pitch, or The Last of Us remake, those were small parts of what was a very long article detailing what happened to the folks at Sony Bend, what's going on with Naughty Dog, and that small group within VASG, right? And that's the thing that most people nowadays don't pay much attention to. They read headlines, tweets, and just kind of run away with the full story, when really they should be reading this whole thing verbatim to get an idea of what was being said. But with the full article and everything that we learned in between, here's some extra things that you do need to know about the whole situation. In the article, we were told that a group at Sony Bend were put on a new Uncharted, which they then had to ask to be taken off of to do their own thing, which they were granted. That was a fairly recent decision, so actually it could be quite a while until we see what Sony Bend is doing for their brand new project. But for that Uncharted, there is some misinformation here. We have no idea if that's still actually going to be a thing at Naughty Dog or with whoever. As far as we know, that was in the early on-paper concept stage. Eurogamer is also reporting that they heard about this, but that it would have been akin to like a reboot or trying a new character, or doing a prequel, something like that, right? And if you've played Uncharted 4, you know where they could go. If you've played Lost Legacy, you could see how they could continue with a different character and make it work. But we have no confirmation that a new Uncharted is still coming. Now, what we do know is that there is still a group at Sony Bend that is helping Naughty Dog finish this multiplayer project, which we're all assuming is factions. We just don't know what it's going to end up looking like, if it's free to play attached to Part 2 or its own standalone premium multiplayer thing. We just don't have any idea, but we are given some clues that it seems like it's being finished up fairly soon. It's in the polishing stage, so whatever it is, we should find out about it in the coming months, I'd imagine. And then probably one of the biggest misconceptions here is this remake for The Last of Us, which I understand the sentiment of, we don't need a remake for this game. In fact, that was initially my gut reaction, but we have to keep in mind that Sony didn't necessarily push this or want it from the very beginning, which that's what we thought was the case with this small group at the Visual Arts Service Group. I thought this was a purpose-built studio that was either working on a brand new IP, or many thought it was a new Uncharted, but this would be a purpose-built team from the very onset with Sony backing, and that wasn't really the case. This small group at VASG were doing this on their own accord as a proof of concept to then hopefully do their own project after supporting other Sony studios for a very long time. That's how this happened. This remake was put on a probationary period up until Sony said, okay, if we're going to remake this game, then we'll give it to Naughty Dog, because they just felt it would have been better in their hands. This wasn't necessarily Sony saying from the very beginning, we need to remake a 2013 game. Which, to their credit, or to be a little bit fair here, the thing is, yeah, we don't really need it, but hey, it's a remake that is probably going to do very well, especially when you align it with this HBO series. And if we do think about what it will end up looking like, which is The Last of Us Part 2, right? You take the gameplay refinements from that game, which I think are much better than the first game. All the visual enhancements, or not even enhancements, right? This is inherently going to be a PlayStation 5 game, actually, so it will look like Part 2 and beyond what Part 2 looked like. We're probably going to see this game. I mean, this game is probably going to be eye-melting. It's going to look ridiculous. It's going to probably be fantastic, and more than likely I'll play it, and I'm sure many other people that are, sour on it right now, they'll probably, if not play it right away, they'll play it eventually. So I know it's easy to look at this and think this is a strange, easy, safe decision, but the one thing that we're also getting some insight on is that a lot of Naughty Dog staff can work on this to familiarize themselves with PS5 hardware, while another team begins conceptualizing and starting pre-production of what will eventually be their next full-blown project, because Naughty Dog isn't quite the team where they can do two complete projects at the same time. In fact, we actually got this inadvertently cooperated with Naughty Dog's co-president Evan Wells, because he was recently on the Game Maker's Notebook with Insomniac Games' Ted Price, where he talked about how there's about 300 staff right now, and they're not quite to a point where they want to do two full-scale projects at the same time like they did with Uncharted 3 and the first Last of Us. They're not there, and they don't necessarily want to be there right now, but they do have a large number of staff to handle what is a remake, a fairly straightforward job, alongside the fact that they've got a small group attached to this multiplayer stuff that they're finishing up, and then a small group that are also beginning pre-production of that next full-scale project, which will surely be quite a long time away. Although we can say, if you are a fan of Days Gone, then we did find out that the PC version launches May 18th on the Epic Games Store and Steam, so good to see that it's not just the Epic Games Store. There is still a Steam version that will be available. Photo mode, ultra-wide support. They just dropped a trailer. It looks gorgeous, so this is coming up May 18th. If you want to support this first entry, then that's one way to do it. Now, moving on to our next news story, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, but during the whole Bloomberg charade, a lot of people were voicing their opinions on Twitter, and more so they were talking about how much they miss Shawn Layden, the former chairman of Worldwide Studios. Before that, he was the president and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, and really he's been with the company for a very long time, but he took on that public-facing role in 2014. But he was actually liking all of those tweets of people asking him to come back, or that they miss him, or, whatever. It was actually really heartwarming to see. He's been very active on Twitter lately, and I wish we could get the full story on why exactly he left and why it appeared so abrupt. I mean, I'm sure something happened behind the scenes, but he had a very high-level position at the company, so between him and a few other individuals, there's very little chance that we'll ever really find out, or at least anytime soon, what exactly happened there, and if there's some serious animosity towards the company, or the idea that maybe there was a power struggle or some intense disagreements. I don't really know, of course. I mean, it's all speculation. I wish we could find out. But what people liked about Shawn Layden so much is that when he was that public-facing figure, he came off very genuine. He was very passionate about the industry, and you could tell that he cared a lot about the projects that he was working on, and that's where a lot of frustrations are often coming from when it comes to somebody like Jim Ryan, right? And a lot of this plays into, I think, the 2020 pandemic, where, a lot of this stuff has to be live streamed, and Sony's just very slow with how they roll out news, and a lot of it comes off as very tone deaf, and then you combine that with all the negative news we've been having, and then combine it with how well Microsoft's been doing with social media engagement. And, maybe you think that's cringy or whatever, but, that's a part of, society nowadays, is good social media, and Microsoft's been doing very good there. So if you're on Twitter, it looks even worse because there's so much of that going on for them, and then you've got Sony just tweeting out casual things like, oh, here's a new game announcement, here's some DLC or whatever, and all this is happening while you've got constant negative press going for PlayStation, and you see Shawn Layden liking all these tweets. It's quite the circumstance that we've found ourselves in. For our next news story, like we just mentioned, the God of War creator David Jaffe was doing another YouTube live stream, I think almost a week ago now at this point, but in this separate live stream from the Days Gone one, one thing that was also publicized and brought up was his mention of a possible Game Pass competitor coming directly from PlayStation, or rather, some sort of answer to Game Pass, because technically Sony does still have PS Now. Not totally relatable, but that might be a foundation that they build upon. Anyway, David Jaffe said this, and I quote here, "What I can tell you is that they are doing some stuff, because I know people at Sony who have told me that they are doing some stuff. There will be a response to Game Pass." Now, one story that I did not bring up when this was actually a thing, because I had just missed it during an LTPS, but essentially this was Jim Ryan doing an interview with a Russian publication called TASS.com or something, and when asked about a competitor Game Pass, he said, there is actually news to come, but just not today. Very short answer, which is why I wasn't too concerned with mentioning it, because I think it's kind of expected that at some point they will do something, but that's what's a little weird about that answer, and more so what a potential response to Game Pass could look like from the Sony side of things, because we know also from Jim Ryan, they've been very forward about this, that for these high caliber AAA multi-million dollar games, and when we say multi-million, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, which is extremely it's up there when it comes to AAA development. That's why Sony has this reputation in the industry for putting out these massive projects, and that's why some of them often do so well, and it pays incredible dividends. But that's why Sony's in an awkward position of, not necessarily just giving away those games for a monthly price, right? That's why they've been doing this conservative approach of saying, okay, we're still doing the normal retail and storefront model, and also we're increasing game prices a little bit. But when it comes to answering or responding to Game Pass, I mean, yeah, there's something there that has to make PS Now a little bit more attractive. We've had this conversation so many times now, but PS Now predates Game Pass, and it's embarrassing how Sony's let it sat there and not really do much of anything. I think for what it is, it's still a really compelling service. You get 800 something games for $60 a year, but it's not available everywhere. There's actually a lot of countries where it's not available. even if, say, for example, we discredit the PS3 games because nobody wants to stream games right now, that would be fine because we can offer 400-something PS4 games and the small amount of PS2 titles that are downloadable, and that's going to be a much smoother rollout to more countries versus what is a logistics nightmare for offering streaming to all those countries. That's why PS Now doesn't really have that rollout that we're expecting, but what I would be curious to see is what would be a meaningful push against something like Game Pass, where it is so aggressive with the day and date first party stuff and even the third party stuff, right? So if Sony's not going to do first party day and date releases, which I'm not expecting as their answer, you do have to probably court a lot of major third parties just to at least be seen as in that parity landscape, right? So getting EA Play in there, also courting Ubisoft, because that's something that Microsoft's trying to do as well. Consolidating with PlayStation Plus, right? So adding more to the value proposition overall. And then if you want to do more goodwill initiatives like the backwards compatibility program, now obviously we've talked about it countless times, you're not going to get native PlayStation 3 player emulation. There's just no return on investment. But what we've seen before, and we know they have, are working super easy emulators for PS2 and PS1 software. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of shocked that we went the whole PS4 lifecycle without those PS1 classics migrating over to PlayStation 4. And the PS2 program was very short-lived, so there's only 50-something games on there, but I mean, it's certainly library fodder at the end of the day, even if there's very low engagement and play on there. It's very much a goodwill program. Goodwill is in it's for the consumer, it's not necessarily for the bottom line, but that's something that you can do and a message that you can send across to make it look as though you have a proper answer and response to Game Pass. And like I said, PS Now isn't nearly as bad as one would think, just that Sony hasn't done anything meaningful with it for years, and I've been expecting it at some point. Maybe it's finally coming soon, and I really want to see what that will look like, especially when we know that we're probably not going to see the first party stuff just given away with a subscription fee. So in terms of consolidation, more third parties, maybe some legacy titles, maybe there's a discount program offered for those day and date first party releases so they're a little bit more affordable than, $70. Whatever the case may be, I want to see what that response or meaningful push will look like. Moving on to our next news story, if you remember not too long ago, Sony made a $250 million investment into Epic Games, and recently Epic Games had a new round of funding of $1 billion, which Sony made another $200 million investment. So now they're at $450 million, but really the valuation of that stake is a little bit higher considering that, well, the valuation of the company is higher. So the original investment is worth more than Sony put in now. So it was one of those things at the time where it was like, okay, Sony could easily just sell this later and enjoy some capital gains, or this might be a long-term strategic partnership, which could certainly be leveraged for, all sorts of facets within Sony, right? So this is not necessarily, or it's not strictly a PlayStation deal. This could be for other facets of Sony, like their film and television, right? Because Unreal is used in all these sectors, and it looks like that is the case. So, I mean, we'll see what happens long term, but Sony obviously is staying close to Epic, and considering how well Epic's doing and how well Sony themselves are doing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, as a little minor news story, we also learned that Aloy is now in Fortnite, so just like Kratos, there's now an Aloy skin, which looks really good, actually. I mean, I don't play Fortnite, but I've always been fascinated by the skin reveals and just how interesting it looks to see certain IP or just characters or real-life people in general, how they look in that game. So I don't know, as an outsider looking in, it's always interesting to see that, but obviously PlayStation is okay with flexing their IP outside of their own platform, which we know they're doing for TV and film, and they're also doing it for these big IP, well-known IP like Fortnite. Now, this is actually a great segue into our next story, which is a job opening in San Mateo, California for a head of mobile at PlayStation Studios, and it's definitely what you're expecting or thinking. So the job listing reads, and I quote here, "As head of mobile, you will own and develop the mobile games strategy for PlayStation Studios and help build a foundation for future growth opportunities. You will lead all aspects of the expansion of our game development from consoles and PCs to mobile and live service with a focus on successfully adapting PlayStation's most popular franchises for mobile. You will be responsible for building and scaling a team of mobile leaders and will serve as the head of this new business unit within PlayStation Studios." So it's probably important to remind everyone here that Sony already has a mobile unit, or rather a mobile first-party developer called ForwardWorks, which people don't often hear about because they put out things that you've never even heard of. So I'm guessing that this mobile unit would very much actually do things that you would be made aware of. So the more traditional, well-known PlayStation IP being converted or used for these smaller scale apps or whatever the case may be, right? I mean, we have no idea what exactly the mobile strategy will look like or be long term, but this is something where, again, Sony has no problem flexing their IP outside of their own traditional console ecosystem. Next up, over on SA's corporate blog, Sony was detailing the PS5 packaging and how a lot of it is completely recyclable, as in they're trying to use less and less plastics, which is always good. You may have noticed this buying PS5, or certainly the accessories where it's all boxed. It's not really using any of those hard plastic cases or anything like that that we've seen before for other PlayStation products. Basically, Sony outlined their goals and commitments long term. So for later this year, actually, in Europe, they're going to be testing cases that are completely made from recycled plastic. So it's still plastic, but recycled plastic, so reusing what's already there instead of making new plastics, which always good. And by 2025, in terms of new product designs and the packaging that will come along with that, they want to eliminate plastic entirely, and for existing packaging and product designs, at least lowering the plastic use by 10%. So I'm all for it, even though I love collecting physical games. I mean, we don't need to use nearly as much plastic as we think we do to have them and store them and sell them. So by all means, I'm okay with really aggressive timelines from big corporations like Sony to lower the amount of plastics that they use in their products. Now, as I mentioned in one of our earlier news stories, a recent episode of the Game Maker's Notebook had Insomniac Games' Ted Price interviewing Naughty Dog's co-president Evan Wells, asking him a number of things. It was a pretty interesting conversation, but one question that was posed in there was about Jak and Daxter. Do you see all the fan requests and things like that? And Evan had this to say, and I quote here, "We do, in fact. We've had a couple of Twitter campaigns where people have been tweeting us every single day. I want to do Jak and Daxter, I want to do Jak and Daxter, and they aren't just simple 280 character tweets. They have Photoshop memes and everything they've been including on a daily basis, and the effort has got to be significant. And I hate to break it to them, but we do not have Jak and Daxter here in development right now." So here's the thing. I love Jak and Daxter, I really do, but when it comes to long dormant franchises, I don't know, I feel like I'm one of the few people that is okay with separating their desires from what might be financially viable or even worth it. You know what I mean? Like, if it comes back, is it really going to meet expectations? Is it going to have the same reverence as it once did? Is it nearly as meaningful? Is it going to move a lot of units, which will, if anything, put it on the back burner for even longer or indefinitely? You know what I mean? Like, there's just so much that could go wrong with bringing back a game like that. Now, I love that there's been ports and the proper remaster on PlayStation 3, which is still a great way to play the game in a fresh take. And we've had plenty of trophy lists and merchandise for it. I mean, I'm fine with that stuff as like short-term fan service kind of stuff, right? I'm not expecting a new Jak and Daxter. I know people constantly ask for it. I should be the one that's vouching right there with them, but I'm just not expecting it, and I'm okay with not having it. Moving on to our next news story, we have a small update on that Last of Us HBO TV series. Looks like we now know who's playing Tommy, which is Gabriel Luna. So we've got him playing Tommy, Pedro Pascal as Joel, and Bella Ramsey as Ellie. And now you've got 3 human faces to attach to these beloved video game characters, and I'm sure we'll get more cast announcements fairly soon. Next up, file this one under a rumor, so take it with a tiny pinch of salt, as we often like to say, but this is coming from Catharsis T over on Reset Era, whom we've talked about a few times before now, when it comes to certain rumors like the Silent Hill thing, or the Death Stranding Extended Edition, which we're still expecting at some point, but when asked certain questions about these upcoming projects from, say, Blue Point, apparently that's a Metal Gear Solid remake, and that apparently Sony's involved for that one. And then for Silent Hill, allegedly that's still in development, but the studio for that has changed, and they don't want to disclose the name for personal reasons. Castlevania was apparently in discussion, but that's all they know in terms of actually being brought back in some kind of substantial way, which Resetera staff then had to chime in saying that they tried to vet the user, but essentially it's secondhand information, so something that they're not directly involved in. Mileage may vary. Believe what you want. So for the MGS rumor, this is the first time where I'm covering it here. This was a thing that was brought up a few times in 2020, but nowadays I try to be a little picky with the kind of rumors that I present here. I don't need to lie or sell some sort of false hope with video game rumors. If there is a credible rumor, and I don't know, I mean credible as in like it sounds believable, if there's enough backing to it, if we've got multiple sources and sites that have no relation to each other, all reporting the same thing, but it's a little bit different, right? So they're not necessarily regurgitating other information. You know what I mean? Like, you can pick up on when things sound like, oh yeah, that's probably actually happening, and other times where it's complete BS. I mean, that's kind of where it was sitting with the MGS rumor, but maybe now, I mean, we'll bring it up and see where this one goes. I mean, the thing is, we're still chasing the Silent Hill one that very much was in the veins of what I just described, right? We had plenty of different places talking about it, but it seems like maybe it was just in such an early stage that it's still going to be a while till we see the fruits of that labor. So that's where we are right now, and I guess we can't really say much else. With all that said, it is time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all. Our Monday video was PS4 random games from eBay. It cost about $300, which was expensive, but that was a Monday video because I was going to do something on Wednesday, but that was overtaken by the PS5 firmware update coverage, so actually that video has now been moved to next week, which means we might have another 2 uploads alongside LTPS for 3 total. Potentially. If that's the case, then you'll see one on Monday and then another one on Wednesday. But that's what we did for this past week, so go check those 2 videos out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.